It's a basic rule of politics. In primary season, candidates adopt a more extreme position to please their party's base. Then once the general election rolls around, they veer back into the center. But here in Massachusetts, it doesn't work that way. In this year's race for governor, Republican candidate Charlie Baker is wearing his disinterested in the right wing as a badge of honor, something we'll examine tomorrow night right here on Greater Boston. But on the Democratic side, the far left seems to be setting the agenda. As WGBH's Adam Riley reports, being labeled a progressive is seen as a necessity, not a choice.
When Boston City Councilor Ayanna Pressley endorsed Maura Healey for Attorney General last week, she praised Healey's resume, but paid even more attention to her values.
She is highly capable as a civil rights attorney, but more than that, she is compassionate.
Healey isn't just a Democrat, Pressley told the crowd. She's a progressive, an empathetic politician who views the world the same way that they do.
Everyone wants to be understood. Everyone wants to be respected and wants to be valued.
For her part, Healey seemed thrilled to get Pressley's stamp of progressive approval.
To me, being a progressive means somebody who's willing to fight for equality, to fight against injustice in all forms, and who's willing to lead and think in innovative ways.
And these days, calling yourself a progressive also puts you squarely in the Democratic mainstream. A couple decades ago, when conservative Democrats like Ed King and Tom Finneran were a potent force on Beacon Hill, the label progressive was one that most mainstream politicians wanted to avoid. But the 2014 elections show just how much times have changed. This year, Healey's primary rival, Warren Tolman, says he's a progressive too. For that matter, so do all three Democratic candidates for lieutenant governor, all three Democratic candidates for treasurer, and all three Dems running for governor. Stonehill professor Peter Ubertasio says it's the culmination of a trend that started 8 years ago.
I think you have to go back to Deval Patrick's first victory in the gubernatorial election of '06. His re-election and then the subsequent election of Elizabeth Warren. I think that Governor Patrick and Elizabeth Warren have helped to remake the Democratic Party in this state.
Today, Ubertasio says even moderate Democrats feel obliged to embrace the progressive label. And he adds Republicans feel the pull from the left, too.
You said, what would you say if your brother told you he was gay?
Of course, in 2014 in Massachusetts, it's safer to back gay marriage and abortion rights than it is not to. And that can leave candidates who push farther to the left feeling frustrated.
I'm the only candidate against casinos, for example. These are multi-billion-dollar corporations coming into our communities, and I'm the only one saying stop. That's not right. I'm the only candidate for governor that's committed to single-payer health care.
But Democratic gubernatorial candidate Don Berwick trails both Martha Coakley and Steve Grossman in the polls, even though he says their progressive credentials don't measure up.
I am the most progressive in the race. If you look at the stands I'm taking, they're bolder and they're more connected to the needs of people at disadvantage, people who really are at risk in our society.
Whether Berwick's struggles are the result of his stands or his style is debatable, but they make one thing abundantly clear. While calling yourself a progressive has become a must for Massachusetts Democrats, that alone is no guarantee of success. There's been a lot of talk about this year about the GOP establishment fending off challenges from Tea Party candidates, Kim. While that has in fact been the case, you could make an argument that the Tea Party has really won the bigger war by shifting the GOP as a whole to the right. And I think there's a similar dynamic at work here with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party here in Massachusetts and the party as a whole.
So when we used to talk about this viewpoint, we called them liberals. What has changed?
I think in large part what changed is that post-Ronald Reagan, the term liberal became seen as something that was sort of hopelessly compromised and tainted, and there was a search for new terminology that would let Democrats get rid of the baggage that liberal carried with it. Every now and then you see Democrats saying, you know, enough with this progressive stuff. Let's just call ourselves liberals. Let's take back the term. But clearly, it's a long way from happening here in Massachusetts. By the way, one caveat. I'm looking for evidence of Barry Feingold, who's running for treasurer, actually explicitly calling himself a progressive on the campaign trail. Still looking for it, but he's adopted and embraced a number of stances that are beloved by progressives, like same-day voter registration.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, sir, very much.
Thanks,
Is embracing a progressive platform a winning strategy for Democrats here in this state? Mara Dolan is a Democratic political analyst and former state Senate candidate, and she is here with us. Mara, good to have you with us. Would you say that this label of progressive is the norm now here in Massachusetts?
It's certainly a label that all candidates want. There are candidates who call themselves progressive who aren't. If you look at the race for governor, Don Berwick is clearly the most progressive. Steve Grossman is the middle, and Martha Coakley is the farthest to the right. There are several issues that distinguish them. Don Berwick is opposed to casinos, and he supports single-payer health care. Steve Grossman supports casinos, but he's open to single-payer. Martha Coakley supports casinos and has said that single-payer may be more expensive than people think it is, and by her supporting the partners' health care deal, she's actually moving away from single-payer.
Well, let's bring in another voice, shall we? This is David Bernstein. He is a political analyst for WGBH News and a contributing editor to Boston Magazine. David, good to see you. Can a moderate Democrat win a primary in this state?
In certain regions, certain areas, there are places where we've seen, the state Senate race, for instance, here and there, and even, you could argue in some congressional districts, someone like a Steve Lynch, but no, clearly one of the things that's happened is that there's been a lot of activating of liberals by, as the professor said in the piece, by Deval Patrick, by Elizabeth Warren and others. They're very active, the liberals, sort of gotten, they take part in the primaries, and who takes part in the primaries gets to decide who the nominees are. So that's, to a large extent, they have sort of aced out the traditional moderate, sort of the Catholic urban conservatives, to a large extent. They still exist, but they feel a little bit outside the party, so they don't participate as much. I think we saw that in the state convention, for instance, for the Democrats.
So what changed in this state that pushed Democrats so far to the left?
I don't think Democrats are any farther to the left than they would have been. I mean, I think certainly the rise of Deval Patrick, who clearly self-identifies as a progressive and is a progressive, but just to expand on the discussion of what a progressive is and how that's different from being a liberal, there are a few distinctions. Progressives talk about evidence-based policy. That's not something that liberals traditionally did. Progressives talk about progressive taxation. I heard Don Berwick early in the campaign use the term fair taxation. We have in Massachusetts a regressive taxation system where the bottom 20% pays twice as much in taxes as the top 20%. So progressives are very concerned about economic inequality, and we'll talk about that a lot.
So are there people who are calling themselves progressives who are not?
Yes, but progressive is also a term that's become sort of a catch-all. You get to define it however you want. So, and part of that is that as Adam said, the Democrats sort of left the term liberal behind, but they also left to a large extent the idea of pure liberalism, the sort of big government as the way to address things. They left that behind. Progressivism has always meant more of sort of a procedural sort of thing. Civil rights is a progressive thing, sort of moving forward on those things. Voting rights and good government, government transparency, that kind of thing. But once progressivism started doing the work of liberalism and progressivism, it can sort of mean, you saw Don Berwick say that not having a casino is a progressive thing. Well, a lot of people would disagree with that. That's stretching it to mean something that doesn't really mean. So it does. You can kind of make it mean whatever you want, but it does ultimately have a ring. There's no question. You heard people saying bold progressive. That must have been poll tested really, really well among Democratic activists, because the term bold progressive was constant in this primary.
One final question. We're seeing this trend here in Massachusetts. Is this a trend we're seeing in the Democratic Party across the country?
Absolutely. We just saw that in Hawaii, where the long-term governor just lost to a challenger. He was challenged from the left. He was challenged by the progressive, and that's what we're seeing across the country. When incumbent Democrats lose, it's because the progressive challenged them from the left.
Mara, thank you for being here. David, good to see you. Thank you very much.